Hello and welcome to Minerals, Rocks, and Fossil Talks. I'm your geology teacher, Jen, and it's time for Throwback Thursday. This is Mount Vesuvius. You've probably heard of it. It is located on the southwest coast of Italy as part of the Campanian volcanic arc along the plate boundary between Europe and Africa. In 79 AD, it had one of the most deadly eruptions in history. Several large earthquakes rocked the area in the years leading up to the eruption, so much so that some of the repairs had not finished by the time Vesuvius blew its top. The earthquake in 64 AD was recorded by Suetonius and Tacitus because it was Emperor Nero's first time performing in a public theater, and like a true entertainer, he had to finish his song before everyone evacuated and the theater collapsed. Brilliant. Many earthquakes were felt in the days leading up to the eruption too, but no one recognized the signs. In fact, Pliny the Younger wrote they were not particularly alarming because they are frequent in Campania. In fact, this carving shown above here is a carving done about some of those earthquakes that they were recognizing, they're shaking, buildings are falling over. Woo! A stratigraphic analysis was undertaken, and it determined that the eruption happened in two phases. The first phase was a Plinian or a Vesuvian phase, in which a column of debris was sent between 9 and 19 miles, or 15 to 30 kilometers, into the air. It dropped about 9 feet, or 2.8 meters, of ash on surrounding cities, and an earthquake destroyed many buildings in Pompeii concurrently. Good times. The second phase was a Pelian phase in which pyroclastic surges engulfed the area as far as Misenum in the west. The south and southeast received the brunt of these, engulfing Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Oplontis in deposits of up to 70 feet or 20 meters thick. The only surviving eyewitness account of the eruption came from Pliny the Younger, who was only 17 at the time. He wrote a letter to Tacitus, a historian, some 25 years after the eruption. He described the ash cloud as having the appearance of which I cannot give you a more exact description of than likening it to that of a pine tree. For it shot up to a great height in the form of a very tall trunk, which spread itself out at the top into a sort of branches. It appeared sometimes bright and sometimes dark and spotted. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, went with others to rescue their friends in Pompeii. He would never see his uncle again. Pliny the Younger stayed behind, but after 3 earthquakes in the middle of the night, he and his mother decided to get the hell out of Dodge. His description of the third quake said, "The sea seemed to roll back on itself and to be driven from its banks," which is an apt description of a tsunami right before landfall. And just for fun, here is what one of those letters that Pliny wrote to Tacitus looked like. So, fun stuff. He had really good penmanship. About 2,000 people died in Pompeii, and another 300 in Herculaneum. Estimates of 16,000 perished in the 2 cities and surrounding villas. Most Pompeian victims died of asphyxiation due to sulfur dioxide and ash inhalation. Meanwhile, in Herculaneum, most folks died due to heat shock from pyroclastic surges. At temperatures of nearly 820 degrees Fahrenheit, or 440 degrees Celsius, soft tissues could have been vaporized and skulls would explode due to rapid expansion of internal fluids. Not a pleasant way to go. Though one of the cool things is that recently this year they've published a paper on finding that some of their brains turned to glass. So that's cool. Not for them, but for us. It's cool to see. It is rated as a 5 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, so bigger than Mount St. Helens and smaller than Mount Pinatubo. Now, while we're at it, let's talk about the VEI. The Volcanic Explosivity Index is a scale used to measure the explosiveness of a volcanic eruption. So I'm going to get me out of the way. Boop. Going from 0 to 8, the index is dependent on volume of material ejected, the height the material is ejected at, and how long the eruption lasts. Here are examples for each number, and you can kind of follow what's on here. They don't have all of them listed, but I've got examples. So 0 is Kilauea. It's less than 10 to the 4th cubic meters in volume that it erupts. The plume is less than 100 meters high, and it's constantly erupting. It doesn't really stop. A 1 would be one like Mount Yake, greater than 10 to the 4th cubic meters erupted. The plume is between 100 meters and 1 kilometer, and they're fairly daily eruptions. Number 2, Mount Etna, which would be greater than 10 to the 6 cubic meters erupted. The plume would be 1 to 5 kilometers high, and eruptions happen every couple of weeks. So, we're seeing the increase. A 3 would be Nevada del Ruiz, greater than 10 to the 7 cubic meters erupted. The plume is 3 to 15 kilometers high, and eruptions happen every few months. A 4 would be one like Mount Pelee. It has greater than 0.1 cubic kilometers volume erupted. Plume goes more than 10 kilometers high, and eruptions happen every couple of years. Then we have our 5, Mount Vesuvius. It shoots out greater than 1 cubic kilometer worth of material. The plume is greater than 10 kilometers high, and the eruptions happen every 12 years or so. Number 7 would be Mount Tambora, which was greater than 100 cubic kilometers worth of ejecta shot out. The plume was greater than 20 kilometers high, and it happens every 500 or to 1,000 years, somewhere in there. And then lastly, we have number 8, which is our supervolcano. That would be represented by Yellowstone. This would eject greater than 1,000 cubic kilometers worth of stuff. The plume would be higher than 20 kilometers, and they happen about every 50,000 years or so. Now, it is important to remember that this is not, like, exact. Every time Vesuvius erupts, it's not going to be a 5 on the scale. In fact, let's see, last time it erupted last in 1944, so during World War II, and it was somewhere between a 0 and a 1. I mean, it's still dangerous, it still killed 26 people, but, I mean, 0 to 1 really, we know, is not an explosive eruption, per se. It was just an eruption. So, that kind of gives you an idea. The examples given are like their biggest eruption that they've had. And all their eruptions just aren't going to be the same. Not all eruptions are equal. Created equal. Let's get the quote right. Anyway, hope you learned something new today. Make sure you tune in tomorrow to learn about Hagerman Fossils National Monument. Hagerman Fossil Beds National Monument. Can they make these names any longer? Man. Anyway, we're going to learn about fossils tomorrow. Fossilize you later.